everybody, it's Sophie and Marco, Dish on the Movies. And we are on episode 7 of The Alienist, which premiered last night, March 5th. And the episode title is called All the Sainted Men, which, frankly, this time I don't know why it's called that, but maybe Marco knows.
All the sainted men in the room with them. All those rich people, and they're in the room with them. That's why it's called that.
Okay.
Duh.
Well, by now you should all know that Mr. Silver Smile, or son of one of the 400 families in New York City, William Van Bergen, was shot in the head by bad and recently fired cop Mr. O'Connor and unceremoniously thrown into the river. Since he had been considered the primary suspect and another killing happened after his death, someone else is the killer. Apparently, ex-Commissioner Burns had been paying O'Connor and another man to watch Van Bergen, and when he discovered what O'Connor had done, he grabbed him by the collar and said, quote, "We serve the rich, and they raise us above the primordial filth." Another body of a boy, like I said, was discovered near the Statue of Liberty. "His name is Rosie," said Marcus. He had talked to Rosie at the stakeout and told him a poem. Rosie's real name was Ernst Lohman. Commissioner Roosevelt joined them at their investigation of the body at the morgue. The body had been mutilated like before, except only one eye had been gouged out, and the boy had been partly scalped. And the group thinks that the reason why only one eye had been gouged out is because the killer was in a hurry or had been interrupted.
By Cyrus, probably.
Oh yeah, that's probably it. Roosevelt remarked something about the body's condition, reminded him of the bodies of soldiers he saw after the Battle of Little Bighorn, or what is commonly called as Custer's Last Stand. Right away, Laszlo's ears perked up. Maybe the killer is an ex-soldier or someone who lived out west. He asked Sarah, Lucius, and Marcus to go back to headquarters and examine the letters they received from mental institutions about any patients who mutilated children and had lived out west at some point. Laszlo and John go to the Natural History Museum to interview Dr. Franz Boas, father of anthropology, who, by the way, was a real person. His assistant, who was very knowledgeable about Plains Indians culture, talked to Laszlo and John and said Plains Indians would do similar mutilations of people they despised, but would never touch a child like that. Why? Because that would mean children were a threat to them, and to hurt them would make them look cowardly and shameful. Since there had been no Indian massacres for about 20 years, Laszlo surmised that this must have happened to the killer when he was a kid. Laszlo gathered a lunch and brought it to the hospital where Cyrus was taken after he was hit by the killer during their last stakeout. He'd gotten a concussion. The same night Rosie was killed. Sitting in the room with Cyrus was a woman named Joanna Crawford, Cyrus's sister. Laszlo had called for her in Philly, where she is a reporter for the Philadelphia Tribune. Other than the obvious killing of innocent children, this is a part of the show which I did not like. I am planning on looking through the book to see if this incident that I'm about to describe really happened. And just as a note, I have not seen anything yet about Laszlo striking Sarah in the face last week, which I didn't like either. Anyway, Joanna Crawford complained to Laszlo that if he was really, quote, friends with Cyrus, bringing him the food and employing him and etc., he would have let him go a long time ago, and that Cyrus spends most of his time working in the stables, which she claimed made him, quote, downtrodden and, quote, more effective than keeping him in shackles and a whip, unquote. And when Laszlo said, okay, well, I want to make sure that you don't have to pay me back for the money that I gave for your education. And Joanna replied that as soon as she could, she would pay him every cent back for that education that he paid for. Therefore, not only did Laszlo save Cyrus from death row or a long life in prison or a mental institution, because if you remember, he murdered somebody.
In which she would have been put in an orphanage and abused her whole life, so.
But he had also given him a job and a roof over his head and paid for his sister's education. What the hell? Is this another strong woman anti-racist agenda baiting part inserted into the show? Stay tuned. I'll keep checking the book.
Probably.
I don't know. I'll check. But I didn't like it, and I don't understand. Okay. He did almost get killed. He could have gotten killed by the killer. He's a real big guy, but the killer is a killer, and he seems to be pretty good at it. And she could have been really upset by it, but to just rag on him and intimate that he was really his slave was ridiculous, because Laszlo told her that they were friends and he cared about him. And he had given him a job, and he gave him a roof over his head, and he said, well, she said something like, well, I think you're getting more out of the relationship than he is. Something like that. And and since he paid for her education too, which I didn't have to do, she's not working for him.
Finish your sheet first before we continue that discussion.
Well, I'm done.
Okay. Well, also, I'd like to bring up the fact that she's never met him before.
Yeah.
And all she knows about him is that he's a nice guy who paid for her entire education.
And she got a job.
Probably even more. And so, what? Like, oh, that's so horrible. And of course, if he's a man, she has to reimburse him, because God forbid a man help a woman out with her education or something. I mean, I guess that's they're thinking, like, oh,
well, I didn't like the fact that
it's just,
she didn't think they could be friends.
Yeah.
And that he really liked Cyrus, and he liked having him around, and everything else was a bonus, and not just to help him, and that he would be the only one getting something out of the relationship, but that they were friends.
And she's never met him before. All she knows about him is that he paid for her entire life.
Well, yeah, Marco just brought that up, and I didn't even think about that. Since she was his sister, what would have happened to her?
Yeah.
If he had gone to a mental institution, or he had been hung, or whatever they did, shot by a firing squad. I don't know what they would do.
Oh no, he's such a horrible person. He's like a a slave master. Ooh, like
And
she
it's
would
just
never
not.
say that if he had paid for her education and all that stuff. She would never say something like that.
That's
And
yeah.
except for if the writers want to have their little dumbass agendas
And we're back
they
to
have
that
all the time.
commercial again. And
Yeah.
Marco thinks we saw the commercial again with the
Yeah.
strong women and all the new TNT series. And Marco seems to think that they edited the commercial.
No, they did. It's like a second version because the
Yeah.
first one, I mean, remember, it had like that Rashid Jones person
Oh yeah,
and
that's
all
right.
the other
This
things.
one didn't
And
have Rashida Jones.
this
in it.
one changed a couple lines. That they have one where uh, stories aren't only told from a male perspective, which nobody said they are only told from male perspectives. Like, and they changed that to like we're giving women a chance too. And so I guess we need to celebrate because this is the first time that a woman has ever worked on a television show before and worked on writing a television show. I mean, that's what they're saying with this commercial. Like, they're revolutionary for letting women work on television.
I don't know. I just I I'm still reading the book. I have a lot to do and I can't just read all the time. I have chores to do and all kinds of other things and in the book, like I said, Sarah carries a gun. She wasn't given the gun by the police department. She has always carried one. I mean, she carries one all the time now. I mean, every day. And it's hidden away. And this is in the book. And she's also, her father trained her to be, stick up for herself, stand up for herself, because he didn't like, she didn't have any brothers and sisters, and he taught her everything. They lived in the country, and he taught her how to hunt. I said this last week. So she's not some little pushover panty waist, and in the
In the
show,
show, she is.
it's like she's supposed to be, and that she doesn't have a gun, and like in the book. And I know this is really weird because of all this stuff about guns, but I'm just saying she isn't anyway that in the book. She's not the typical high class woman who sits around and giggles and plays stupid games about getting murdered and falling on the floor, which they showed in this reunion we talked about that she went to, and just going to auctions and buying things and pretty little things and putting them on the shelves and admiring them. And so I mean, she's in the book, she's not the typical woman. She's a strong woman, and she helps with investigation. The books, she's a major player. She sits there, they all talk about what's going on and are trying to figure out who the killer is. She has a big part in that, even more than in the movie or the show.
And in the show, it's basically like she's a little victim who's pushed around by men. Like, oh, she can't do anything. She's inhibited to do anything because men are making her. I don't know. Like that's just the type of feeling that I get, that it's like she's facing this horrible oppression from them, and like she can't do anything, and
Well,
she's
they let her do some stuff, but it's in the book. It's not like that.
she's
More
proactive in the book.
Yeah, she's proactive in the book, and they accept it. They accept her. There's more of an acceptance, and it's like it is today. If there was a group of men and women, and they were working on a case together, and they all had a part to play, and on TV,
In the show,
it's a little bit more.
it's gender baiting. Like she's facing all this horrible oppression, and she can't do anything, and men are horrible, and all they do is they don't believe in her, and they smack her in the face, and
Yeah, I'm still looking for that.
all they care about is the fact if they can sleep with them or not. Like that John Moore guy, he's so upset when Chrysler says that she'll always be his friend only, and like, oh, that's all men are concerned about, but in the book, it's a lot different and a lot better,
Yeah.
obviously. So,
Yeah, that's another thing too. They do mention in the book, Sarah mentions in the book, maybe Chrysler does too, and it's like less than a paragraph. It's just real short. That John doesn't have any compunction about sleeping with prostitutes, and it was in reference to something they were discussing with this killer. But they don't have sex scenes in the book.
yeah.
There's no two prostitute scenes for John Moore, and then Marcus, one of the forensic detectives.
There's no random
There's no
Jewish socialist girl.
there's no sex scene with him either. So that's put in the show.
Really weird.
Which why? Why? So anyway,
Because that's all men are concerned about is having sex.
I guess I don't know. Well, they've kind of cut down on that now.
Yeah.
So it's more about the case and the boys who are forced. Who knows why they're in prostitution, which there seems to be a variety of reasons. So, which they've talked about with like the Santarelli boy.
Not really on the show.
But not that much. Not like in
Not
the
at
book.
all.
Not like in the book. And
It's hardly even touched on. It's like, oh, kids can be prostitutes. That's cool. Who cares? We gotta focus on women being empowered.
well, whatever. Anyway, I don't know if you want to talk about any of these other things. There was a meeting, a forced meeting with John and Dr. Chrysler. They were taken to see Bishop Potter, J.P. Morgan, and Commissioner Burns. And J.P. Morgan, already last week I said he warned Roosevelt that if they didn't stop going after one of the 400, which was Van Bergen, that he was going to lose his job and all his friends and be an outcast. Well, Chrysler said something like, well, he's not even a suspect. We have figured out that it's somebody else. And, you know, he's talking to J.P. Morgan, who's like at this point in time in 1896, he's probably one of the wealthiest men in the world. Very powerful, very good in business, very well respected for his business acumen. And probably, I think they're like at the head of the 400 families, like they're the top money maker.
300.
No, they said 400
It's 300.
in the book, and in the show too.
Oh, okay.
Anyway,
And
Chrysler kind of says, well, this guy is not even a suspect. Don't you think it's good that that we try to find out who the killer is? Like, who's been murdering children, and he says all the stuff about mental, the mind, and investigating the mind, and how somebody could do that.
And Buffalo Bill's cool.
Yeah, the guy, Commissioner Burns, is the guy who played Buffalo Bill in Silence of the Lambs. Anyway,
The problem with the show is that it's horribly written.
so anyway, he butters up J.P. Morgan. It ends up J.P. Morgan says, okay, well, you can keep investigating, which is really weird. They have to have his blessing. And he even offers to pay them. But Chrysler refuses, and he tells John Moore afterwards that if they paid him, then they might have to owe him something. You know, like in Washington with lobbyists.
Which I'm surprised that
Which is true.
Which I'm surprised that they even drank that glass of lemonade, because
Yeah, he offers them lemonade.
to a rich person it'd be like, oh, this guy took my lemonade. He's got to pay me back for that.
So Commissioner Burns is really not happy, and Bishop Potter, who cares? He just kind of goes. He doesn't even say that much.
And let's not give anything else away now.
Okay. Well,
So
the only thing I think we should bring up is that Sarah finds out that um, that this could be a soldier or somebody from the West, and they had figured that out too, and that they have a name of somebody, or they have somebody who's the person could have stayed at this place, and they call it one thing, but they're hiding what it really is. It's really an institution where they sent soldiers and Navy people who had been uh, found to be mentally unfit for service, and they sent them to this government place. And in order to get the records, you'd have to go to this other place and look through them, to see if they could see who the killer is. And so she said she was going to go. Well, and then she goes, well, John says, will you come with me? We'll go see Chrysler. And she says, oh no. And she acts all upset. And he said, did something happen to you? And
let's not give anything else
well, I
away.
won't say anything else about it, but then something happens after that.
I don't know why you're giving that away.
Well, anyway,
it
goes back to that thing
about the episode.
Well, it goes back to the incident that happened last week, which I have not seen any evidence that it happened in the book. So.
Okay, so this episode is slightly improved over last week, but still it's a horrible show.
No, it's not.
It's mediocre at best. It's horribly written. It's horribly organized. The dialogue is pretentious and agenda driven, and the characters, I mean, the only characters that are cool, I mean, it's like they're not even the focus of the show. They're the side characters, and that horrible Dakota Fanning is the main character, even though the book is called, and the show's called The Alienist, so the Alienist is supposed to be the main character, and he's treated like he's some eccentric side character like Batman or something, and he's really awful, and he's flawed,
but they're suspicious of him, though, and that's true, because the science that he's promoting, psychology, is very young, and all the forensic investigative work they're doing
if this was his
is
show,
also new.
If this was his show and not her show, then we would be in his perspective, and we would be following his story.
And truthfully, in the book, it is narrated by John Moore. It is not narrated by Sarah or Dr. Chrysler. The whole book is in John Moore's words.
We don't have any idea why Buffalo Bill and Captain O'Connor, ex-captain, why they're doing what they're doing. I guess to serve rich people. That's not very much of a motivation to me.
Well,
I mean, it's not shown, like, it's not demonstrated at all. It's just, oh, we say it, so that means it's true. And I mean, there's no motivation for anything. The killer we haven't even seen yet, basically, and he's some random guy that we've never even seen. We don't even know what he looks like.
Well, they show that in the episode. John Moore is trying. Remember, Stevie was approached by him in the bar last week, and then he says, "It's him, it's him." He gave him a signal, and they run after him, and Marcus fired a shot at him, and
he's still not shown. We have no idea who he is.
They try to
what he's about.
John Moore tries to get his description, draw a picture like a sketch artist from Stevie, but it doesn't work out very well.
And
Stevie has a hard time describing him.
There's nothing good about the show.
Okay, I just hate to say, Marco and I disagree, and don't listen. Just keep it into perspective.
There's nothing good about the show. Don't watch it at all.
Marco!
Just read the book and forget about the show.
That's just terrible for you to say that.
I mean, maybe if you have $1 million, I'll write a Alienist movie that's 1,000,000 times better than this horrible show. This abomination to
Marco,
the book
okay.
and the story.
Okay,
Don't
well,
watch the show.
Marco, that's terrible.
Watch our review of the show and skip the show.
They can't watch it, they can only listen to it. Well, I say
You can
continue to watch the show, but also read the book.
You can watch the black screen.
It's really good. So anyway, I think that's enough. We are going to be reviewing MasterChef Junior, which premiered last Friday. And we also will be reviewing My Bodyguard and Hitch and the new movie Game Night. So be on the lookout for those reviews.
But we have to rate this horrible episode.
No, we're not rating the episode.
You almost said horrible.
Okay, well, we have to go now because I have to cook dinner.
I give it a D++.
Well,
it almost made it to a C, but the show still is less than mediocre.
Well, I'll give it a B+.
Okay.
But I did not like the part with that Joanna Crawford and what she said to Dr. Chrysler. I thought it was totally unnecessary, and I've not seen that in the book.
And I'll tell you,
I don't know if it really happened.
If that scene wasn't in that episode, I would give it a C-. So, just so if the writers of the show are watching, you guys cost yourself a C-.
Okay, well, we have to go now. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Listen to our review for it on episode 8 next week. Bye.